Hello and welcome to Spectrum. Over the last year, we have been looking at the gendered life cycle, covering everything from birth to sex and love. Our current series is on work and leisure, and in this episode, we will be looking at sexism in STEM. For those who don't know, STEM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering and Mathematics. We will be looking at the gender dynamics to find out if sexism is still a factor in these fields. To open the podcast, here are some vox pops of people's perspectives on sexism in STEM.
I think that it's really interesting, this idea that that the actual science is gendered, that women create things for women, that, for example, like how painkillers work, has been shown that most painkillers actually work better on men than they do on women. And I don't love this argument because it kind of builds on biological essentialism, saying that male bodies function differently from female ones. But I think you can still accept that there's a gender spectrum and say that more masculine bodies work differently to more feminine bodies, ones that reproduce versus ones that don't. But painkillers have been developed based on masculine bodies. And so they can actually show that women's pain tolerance is completely different. The actual system works differently, and so painkillers don't work as well on women as they do on men. And that's kind of an example where the content, where we say, science is unbiased, science is universal. Is it though? Because very often, another example is the air conditioning temperatures in offices. They're set according to a certain formula, and it turns out that the study that was used to devise this formula was based on a study of 50-year-old Danish men only. So that is their metabolism that was used as the reference point. And women typically have a faster metabolism, so they will always be colder in office spaces than men, which is something I've experienced firsthand. It's freezing. But that goes to show again that what you take as the norm, a normal human body, if you say, 45-year-old white male, then that's going to change the actual content of your universal science.
A while back there was a big campaign to try and get more women into IT and into app design, and so they went out and specifically organised girl-only IT app programs, and they found a lot of the apps that these groups of women were making were things like app to find the nearest public toilet, or an app to make sure you got home at night safely, apps that had effects on making your everyday life better instead of gaming apps. That wouldn't be true of all the time. I think gaming apps, women can also make them, but it just shows that they were making a lot of very useful apps. They showed that it was a great thing to get women into IT and into app design, and that is one of the biggest areas that women have been excluded from. IT is where the money is going to be. So the fact that women are being discouraged from entering this field where the money is going to be and the jobs are going to be, that's going to affect the average women are making compared to men.
Because it comes down to this idea of if women don't feel accepted in different companies, it's about company culture. And nowadays it's such a trend for companies to be we need to have the best talent, and we need to create a company culture to ensure that the people stay for us, so Google and so on. It just doesn't make sense then to have a company culture that isn't welcoming to women. It's just completely wrong, and it's this. The premises of business is you invest your eggs in different baskets and not just in one. So I just don't understand.
Well, we certainly don't understand either. And in this episode, we will interview students and professionals to find out more about their experiences in STEM and current research on sexism in the field. First up, I interview Tank Mo, who is the student champion for Interconnect at St Andrews University, where Spectrum is based. Interconnect is a network for women studying in STEM fields and aims to create a more equal society.
Hello, what is your role in Interconnect and how did you get involved?
Hi, my name is Tang and I'm a chemistry student studying in St Andrews right now. My position in Interconnect right now is a student champion. Basically what I do is I am the representative of the organization, and now we're based in St Andrews and we try to promote the gender equality in the community. So we try to draw attention to the issue of women who study in STEM field. and we try to fix it.
And how did you first get involved?
I attended the Interconnect event last year, and I find it really useful to me. It was really interesting, so I want to get involved more. So what I did is I signed up the mailing list. I attend several more sessions of the event, and I talked to the previous student champion. She was a PhD student in her final year, and then she told me that this year her position would be open to apply. So I applied and I got the job, and I think it's wonderful.
Excellent. And what does Interconnect aim to do?
Interconnect is an active network for women who work in STEM field, and I'm going to say STEM field a lot. Basically, it's a major of science, technology, engineering, medicine, and mathematics. So what we do is we give an extra push, an extra support to the women who study in this field. We help them develop a personal network to the industry. We promote the field to the younger students, and we give them role models. We hold a talk, a seminar to inspire them, and we also post up the news and the relevant updates towards their own field of studying on our website too.
And do you think that within the St Andrews community, is there a problem with women in science?
Right now, I don't think there's a big problem. What I feel towards St Andrew is we have a really positive community. We have a well-established society to help women in general. We have Feminist Society, and then we have Athena Swan, which is a great organization helping postgrad and PhD students like committed to their own career. So I don't think we have much problem in St Andrews. The only thing I can think of right now is that some people are unaware that there is a gender gap in this field, in the STEM field, and based on that ignorance, sometimes discrimination happens.
Okay, so what about in broader society? Do you think the problem manifests itself more clearly there?
Yes, the problem is very obvious. Actually, it shows in the statistic. When you look at the statistic, more female actually enroll in the university than male students. And when you look in terms of the measuring, we have almost 1-to-1 ratio of women to male studying science. But in the job industry, only 13% of women make it out there. And I think it speaks very clearly about the discrimination that happened, because employees just don't expect women to be cut out for the job somehow. And I think that's the biggest problem that has to be fixed.
And what do you think the causes of these problems are?
Fundamentally, it started from sexism, and it happens from very young age. Girls are generally not encouraged to study the hard subject, or what people call the boy subject, even if their studies show that girls can excel in mathematics and physics and all that, but usually they are not encouraged to study them. And even if they choose to study this subject in university, it's really hard for them to get internship, because girls are generally, I'm not going to say less confident, but they are more reserved in their quality. So when they go to the interview, they are not very assertive in their quality. They're not going to go out and say, you should hire me because I'm this and that. They're usually waiting for the employee to see their charm and their talent in the CV. While men, they're prone to repeat their good quality over and over again. They're more confident and they're more assertive, and usually the employee likes that. So male students are more likely to get hired, to say, for the internship, and of course that build up in the CV. It makes it easier for them to get a job too. In real life world, women are not generally high, because employee kind of assume that at some point female employer would quit their job to get married or have children, and that is a disadvantage. So yeah, that's a problem, I think.
And with these problems, what do you think some potential solutions are? Obviously, Interconnect is one of them, and you're doing amazing work. But how do you see this going forward?
Well, I think the easiest way to fix this is we all just work together and raise the awareness. And the easiest way is just to reshape the community, just teach people to be progressive, tell them where the problem is, what the problem is, and why it is wrong. And I think people are smart enough to know that this is not the way it's supposed to be, that we're supposed to fix it. And I just have a lot of faith in the next generation, that we're going to grow up to be a parent, we're going to grow up to be a teacher, and we can tell them that it is okay for you to be a girl and be in this field and be really good at it, and you don't have to hide.
Fantastic. And my final question, thank you so much for your time, is about intersectionality and the kind of importance of this within the feminist movement. So I was just wondering if you could tell us a bit about your own positionality, your own story, and your own experience of being a woman in science.
I am born in Thailand, and by the time I'm 12, I moved to Malaysia. And then I lived in Sydney for a year, Sydney, Australia. So I've been to so many countries. And when I was really young, I never actually contemplated getting a job in science field because I thought it's a boys subject and I never dreamed of getting into it. But, at some point my interest won over me and I decided I want to study chemistry. Then I come to St. Andrews. And what I found out along the way is studying science while you are a girl is not hard, but to get opportunity, that is the hard part. I remember once I got an internship in Australia working in a lab, and instead of spending majority of my time doing what I'm good at, which is working on chemical lab and analysis thing, instead I have to try to win over my co-worker who is majority males, and I have to try to just put myself out there and tell them that, it doesn't matter that I'm a girl, I know how to do stuff. I got in here just as fine. I applied into the job with the same process as you, and I got in, and you have to trust me to do these things, because I think part of it is because I am Asian too, and most people just don't trust that I can do the job in the English speaking world or English speaking company. So I'm not the first choice that they would come to, even if they know that I'm very good at certain aspect of the job. So it kind of put everything in perspective, and I don't know, I feel really passionate about the issue and I really want to fix it.
Fantastic. It seems like you're very kind of committed to going forward with this, which is amazing.
Yeah, well, it is my future too, so I try to do my best to make the world a better place.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Tang, for taking the time to talk to Spectrum about your wonderful work. It's definitely worth getting involved and finding out more about Interconnect. If you are studying at St. Andrews, then just type University of St. Andrews Interconnect into Facebook and it's the first page to come up. Next up, Sophie Gilbert and Liz Monday, now journalists working with Spectrum, interview Polly Arnold. Professor Arnold is a lecturer in chemistry at the University of Edinburgh. She specialises in making F-block molecules and is the proud maker of a chemical imbalance. She is also a confident feminist and has worked to combat sexism in STEM.
Okay, so questions. So tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay then, I'm Professor Polly Arnold. I'm the Crum Brown Chair of Chemistry at the University of Edinburgh.
What is your involvement in helping women in STEM subjects?
My involvement is that a couple of years ago I started running a project as a result of funding that I got from the Royal Society through being awarded the Rosalind Franklin Prize. And it was at that point that I suddenly realised that I was a bit different to mainstream scientists. So the difference that I have is that I don't have any unconscious bias. What that means is that I had gone through my entire career, in fact my life, assuming that everybody was equal and would be treated equally, particularly within science where we think that every decision we ever make is evidence-based. And it wasn't until I started reading more into the literature and looking at how people within society treat each other, that I realised that unconscious bias is something that affects all of us in society to a greater or lesser extent, and it means that we really are disfavouring certain types of people as a result of the way we've been brought up and the way we behave. And that meant that I really had to do something. It meant that when I thought that all we had to do was wait for a long time until we ended up with equal numbers of men and women in positions of power, high-quality science jobs, jobs within the media, within politics, within law. I thought we just had to wait, but it turns out we can't just wait because of unconscious bias and because of the way society behaves.
Thank you. And what do you think is some of the biggest issues facing women in science at the moment?
Okay, so the big elephant in the room is women's own self-confidence. There is a lot of excitement at the moment about feminism and people paying attention to the fact that women aren't getting good representation. But when I look at the long lists and the short lists, when I look at the long lists of job applications and when we're looking to hire a new person, I'm still not seeing women recognizing their own potential and putting themselves forward. Not just for jobs, but also in seeking mentoring or having the self-confidence to really apply for things. That's something that really annoys me, because I see feminism as really something that's quite, it's really exciting now. I really see a big movement at the moment, and I want people to have more confidence in themselves.
So what are your words of advice to young female STEM students like myself?
Okay, you have to look at the data and you have to realize that most women wait until they're 120% ready and most men wait until they're 80% ready. You have to look at the data and realize that the fact that you got somewhere is not because you were lucky, it's because you were good. You have to look at the data and realize that people get jobs or get interesting positions because they chance it, because they apply for something that they could be good enough to do. And you have to have that confidence and go and do it. And you also have to realize that there are a lot of people out there who do want to help, who want to mentor and who want to champion, but they're incredibly busy. And you just have to go and ask. And if they're too busy, they'll say, but they'll probably put in an extra 5 minutes or something or other to try and help. So people do want to help.
What do you think is being done to combat discrimination in STEM?
What do I think is being done? Well, I'd like to say not enough. And that's, again, because everybody's really busy. It bothers me that people think that they're putting in measures in place to help us avoid succumbing to unconscious bias when we're trying to look for somebody to hire or when we're trying to select people for something or other, but we don't do it in the right way. So very often we will just show some slides before we interview somebody, or I will go to a meeting and I will see people all excited that they managed to put a woman into the shortlist and not embedding it in part of the way they think at all times. And I would like to see both men and women who are aware and concerned about the equal opportunity agenda, just to be more confident in calling people out when they see people not quite realising what they need to do to combat their unconscious biases.
Is there anything else you would like to see happen to combat inequality, and how would you like to see it done?
So the question that always comes up as that dangerous one at the last question is the one about quotas and whether we think quotas could be useful. We've seen them be very successful and increase company profits when quotas have been introduced in Norway in company boards, and we saw them as very successful when the Labour government tried them a few years ago. Scientists are still deeply against them, and possibly that's because there just aren't quite enough women in the high up positions in science as yet, and they're still too scared of this. Personally, I would have no problem with introducing quotas at the lower levels right now, where we're still struggling to get our pipeline to stop leaking. I would be very happy, but I do want to see more women being put onto our long lists before I can convince all the senior management that quotas would be fine. We need more people to be championed and mentored into actually applying for these jobs in the first place. Maybe we need to convince them that the jobs are really cool and interesting so they apply. It might just be that some of the self-selection is because they think that the workplace that we're in isn't the sort of place where they want to be, and maybe that's another job I have to do, is to convince people that actually it's a really cool job.
So do you think that, sorry, this isn't on the list.
Doesn't matter.
Do you think there's like a problem in the way in which science is advertised to people as they're growing up and choosing what they want to do with their lives, like science kits for boys or like anything like that?
I'm pleased to see everyone catching out companies on gendered toys now. That's really cool. I think men of teenage daughters are some of our most powerful feminist allies at the moment. I see all the stuff I do where I see kids being excited about science is fantastic, and I think maybe that then gets lost in the teenage years, or maybe we're at a point where that's not lost anymore. You know, they say you can never tell when you're in the middle of the revolution that it's actually happening. Maybe we're in that position now, and the five-year-old girls who I see so excited are going to remain as excited as the boys about science, and society isn't going to kick it out of them when they hit teenage years. Maybe this is it. Maybe it's all going to happen from now.
Why don't you tell us about your Chemical Imbalance film for the purposes of people who haven't seen it?
What we did was, with the Chemical Imbalance film, we recognised that we'd had a very long history of successful female chemists at Edinburgh, and it was a very old department as well, and we wanted to know whether we'd done anything different to all the other departments, where there were fewer women, whether there was something special we could pin it down. Because whenever you read all the normal reports, you just get a lot of anecdotes about something or other, turning people on or turning people off to science. And so we set up loads of questionnaires, and we asked loads of complicated and arcane questions, and we got nothing special back. The key thing that we found was that there'd been a few strong mentor, champion type people throughout the years. That was the only thing we could find that made us any different. So what we did was made a film which was basically a call to action for trying to point out to the people who are too busy to read all the documents and too busy to read all these huge reports that get produced, these key points that you need to do to make your workplace a better place for everybody to thrive. And to do that, you need to support women who want to work there.
If you feel comfortable talking about them, what are your personal experiences with sexism in the workplace and in your science career in general?
Yeah. So actually, that was something that came out in the film that we made. The film is 13 and a half minutes long, and there are hours worth of material on the cutting room floor. Awful lot of that is where we would say to people, "Oh, have you had any experience of sexism in the workplace? And have you had any experience of sexism in the workplace?" And everybody being interviewed went, "Oh, no, not at all." And then we would ask them more specific little things, and absolutely everybody had a horrific story of blatantly sexist behaviour from a colleague. Every single type of everyday sexism that I can think of got covered, and yet they didn't remember until they were quoted. And this suggests to me that the people who are surviving and thriving in the workplace at the moment just blank these things out without even realising, because we don't even regard them as particularly sexist behaviour, which is why I want people to be able to call each other out when they behave badly. So if you want an example from me, my favourite one is when I was a junior academic, and the university looked at the women in its across the board in the sciences, and they realised that they were winning all these international prizes, and they were doing amazing stuff, but they weren't getting promoted within the university. So they specifically put us on a course to help us develop in order that we could get promoted at our university. And this is something I mentioned in the film. I cannot believe that nobody thought to put the men on a course.
That's like, wow.
Thank you so much to Professor Arnold for taking the time to be interviewed by Spectrum. I think we can all do more to confront our subconscious biases and be more confident in ourselves. Before moving on to our final interview, we are going to offer an exclusive insight into the Blue Stockings. Blue Stockings are a group within the University of St Andrews Feminist Society. I myself am a member, and we meet every 3 weeks to discuss issues of gender ranging from theory to everyday sexism. Here are the Blue Stockings' thoughts on parenting and women returning to the workforce in STEM.
I wonder if in STEM also, because it's such a
like, it's hard to say it generally, but it's such a fast-paced, like, it's always moving, there's always new information, so, like, leaving for, like, 5 years to look after your kids until they get into preschool or something, you miss this whole chunk, and it's, like, a completely different subject. Like, this is, like, not particularly applicable, but, like, my biology teacher in high school said she went back and did her master's after 10 years, and she didn't know any of this new stuff she was taught. So, like, I feel like that's less the case with history or languages. Like, they stay the same relatively over a 10-year period or something. So, like, I wonder if that contributes as well to women feeling like they can't take maternity leave, or companies not wanting to hire you because you're going to take maternity leave, and then, like, trying to get back into the...
This is what my mum did, basically. So she took some time off to help raise me and my brothers. And when she came back, she managed to, I think, through, like, some, like, special, like, there are sort of groups that try and help get women back in exactly the situation she was in.
And I'm not saying that, like, you can't get back at all.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
But she, after her first, so I think she got, I think it was like a year contract or something like that. And after that year, they were very reluctant to renew her contract. She was applying for lots of jobs, and internally, and other internal people who seemed to be less qualified than her, but younger, were the ones getting the jobs. And she was like, you know, you can't actually do this. This is ageist. This is not okay. But they were like, oh, like, sorry, like, eventually, you know, she applied to a lot of jobs, and I don't know, she just has to take whatever odds and ends in the science world that she can get. So I think she's doing, like, some science promotional kind of things, so things like making blogs and stuff now, when, you know, she used to, like, do testing for clubfoot and stuff. So it's like she enjoys doing this, but she's had to, in order to stay in science, had to just vastly change become very flexible about what areas of chemistry science she wanted to do, because otherwise, you know, she would be out because of that kind of discrimination.
Yeah, but the point you raised up is actually quite interesting, no? I mean, maybe it's an actual problem that, you know, we can fix it. Maybe have some organization helping women just, like, get back in track, like, after they go away for how many years to raise their child. But at the same time, maybe we should renew, like, the look of the role of, like, mother in the society, because what happened with my family is, and I know my mom didn't do this because she's a raging feminist, we're just really poor, but when I was born, she took some time off to take care of me, but then she go back to work really soon because she can't afford to lose, like, you know, those income and all that. And while she go back to work, because she earns more than my dad actually took paternity leave, which is a thing in Thailand, because, like, men can do that too, and just raised me and my brother. That is what happened. So I think that is also another solution. You know, like, when a kid is being born, it's not only the mother's child, but it's also a father's child. So maybe don't push that only as a woman's responsibility.
And I think that even if I totally agree. But I also think that even if we did, you know, like, somehow magically, like, there was a feminist revolution and, like, women were no longer expected automatically to raise the children or automatically to do the laundry or, like, automatically to take their husband's last name or, like, whatever. There were no longer, like, gendered expectations of what women were going to do in terms of, like, housework or, like, getting married right out of uni and having kids. Even then, like, for women who choose to have children, like, your body physically needs time to recover from, like, pushing a baby out of it. Whereas, like, men don't have that same problem because they have not just pushed another human being out of their bodies. And so, like, I think even without the gendered expectations, there are things that women deal with, which are women-specific problems, that, like, need to be accounted for in the workplace. Because women would still need, like, a week off, even if they weren't even if they weren't going to be the ones who were actively raising the child.
I heard an interesting fact, and I have not been able to find the paper to back this up, but that actually, on average, including maternity leave, men and women take about the same time off, like, work, because men take more sick days than women. So actually, it doesn't actually, you know, make a difference. It's just they take a bulk leave instead of like mini ones. So that like is something that people should kind of know about a bit more, maybe.
And also with this argument, it's like you're 100% right. But I also think there's a problem with kind of like essentialising amount of time it will take for women to recover.
Yeah,
And to use that as an excuse, if that makes sense. So like it will be different for every woman. So like my sister, admittedly, is insane and isn't Wonder Woman. And so she gave birth and it was the most horrific birth. She was told she couldn't have children and was like, I disagree, which is typical for my sister. So she gave birth to her child and then was in hospital for pretty much a full month after it. 4 months after that, she was back at work and training again for like all of her swimming competitions and stuff because she's very senior in the NHS and she was just like, I'm done, I'm going back to work. And like, despite having the most, and that's not like, we shouldn't be pushing that, we shouldn't be pushing women to go back to work too early, I'm not arguing that. But the point is that for some people, that's fine and it can be done. And she was just kind of like, despite having been in hospital for a month, 4 months later was just like, need to be working again, and was. So it's kind of like difficult with these debates where you kind of want to like recognise that, but also not allow employers to use it as an excuse like, well, we won't hire women because they're going to have children. Oh, they're going to need so much time off work. Oh, they're going to be more focused on their families than their career, you know, whatever else. All these things may be true, but they may equally not be true. And it may be that, you know, men have sons and daughters and tend to give to children and then don't care about their jobs.
Yeah, but the point you raised is really interesting though, about how, you know, you went away for maybe 5 years and all that to raise children. When you come back, the world has moved on scientifically. So could anybody come up with like maybe a suggestion of how we can overcome that problem? Because it's really logically sound.
Well, I think with the internet, it is capable to keep up to date on the science if you.
But at the same time, ask a mum who
Right,
has like two
yeah.
toddlers, ask her if she has time to keep up with like
Yeah.
reading 3 articles a day. Like, I'm not saying
No, I understand. I was
but
just like
feel
thinking
in
that.
practice.
I think maybe it's like introducing the idea that it doesn't necessarily need to be like either I'm up as a mother or I'm working. It's like maybe you could introduce that you work 25% of all of the time that you would otherwise, and slow steps, which I think is a thing.
Yeah, no, it is. That's what I was going to say, is like that exact point. And I think part of the problem is that we're still, like, companies in general are still so bad at the idea of part-time work and job sharing and flexible working hours and working from home. And, like, there are so many different, like, forms of what a job can look like. And we still have this, like, 9-to-5 idea in our head. And the part of the problem is, and this is really sad, like, I'm quite interested in HR, and I was at a conference for it recently, and one of the arguments they were putting forward that a problem with this is that we're really bad at training managers who can deal with that, because it would actually be a lot better for employees and for companies to run if they created more inclusive jobs that more people could take up, and they would gain more from all these different skills, like women who have young children but still want to work. But you need very competent managers to be able to liaise with all of those people and to put that in place. So when you have managers who can do that, that's fantastic. But there's not a recognition as yet that we need people who are trained to have that kind of organisation ability, who don't just have to sit there and know that people are supposed to be there 9 till 5 and then they go home and they know who should be there and who isn't there. And it's harder to do, but definitely more effective.
I have a kind of hopeful story along those lines. I work in a place in Sweden over the summer. It's like working in supply chain analysis, but basically everyone I work with have a degree in engineering, and half of them roughly are women, and generally I work with for 3 years, and there's always somebody who is pregnant or has just given birth. And it's just an amazing environment, because over lunch, all these women are discussing, I went into labor, I was in the toilet, in the office, and my water broke. And they describe how they had to deal with that situation. And our manager herself was pregnant at the time, and was discussing how she was going through morning sickness. And half of the guys around the table are men, and they're listening to this. And, it's quite, discussing placentas and bodily fluids and, the water breaking, and it was all over the carpet, and but it's kind of normalized, and that stigma that is normally there was removed, and especially since the woman in the most authoritative position, our manager, was a woman who was pregnant, having her second child, there was really nobody who would dare to say, shut up. And most of the women there, when they've just given birth, they take about a year off, which both mothers and fathers are entitled to in Sweden, but then they go back and they work 80%, which is to say 4 days a week. And just, I don't know, but it works. Like, it really, really works there.
Sorry.
I think that the huge thing is once you have one woman, even in like a middle manager position, you have a role model, and nobody's going to question her. And I think it's also a lot about normalizing the everyday conversation, not seeing pregnancy or mothering as this like alien thing. We all do it. It's normal. Sorry, what were you?
No, I completely agree, and I think it's therefore it's so important that the government these things need to be institutionalized. Parental leave, paternity leave, and maternity leave needs to be institutionalized, and it's just that individual companies can't go about this like that might be conscious capitalism for you, and that might work for some people, but it's not going to work for the majority, and it does work. Yeah.
Like if you want to leave for somebody and if you want to come back for the field, like if it's for architecture, for medicine, you can take the exam just to determine if you still have the knowledge that is relevant to the nowadays field. I don't understand why we can't just have the same thing for everything.
Yeah, I was thinking that maybe like companies could put in place just like sort of training classes for people who have been like who have taken some sort of like leave of absence of their job, and just like catch those people up on like what's happened since they left. Like, surely it wouldn't be that difficult to take, like, I don't know, like, a week, maybe 2 weeks, to just be like, hey, here's how the technology has progressed since you were last working for us. And surely that's more in the company's interest as well, because then the company doesn't have to train completely new employees who don't know as much about the field. They have someone who's already an expert, but just needs a little bit more info.
Yeah, my grandma actually went through this when she was, she had children, and she took like 5 years off or something, and then like the children were starting to grow up, and she was like, oh, I really want to start working again. And then the pharmacist she lived in this little village, contacted her and said, you know what, we're expanding right now, we need more people, can you please come and work with me, we'll have a training camp. So they had like a week getaway with like 7 other women, and they were all trained into like catching up with the pharmaceutical developments. And this was during the 60s, 60s. So it's like it's existed, but it's just not
normalized.
Yeah, it's silly because it works. Yeah. But speaking of history and like historical representation, I feel that's something that I never think that there are like that women and engineers have actually invented things, but there are so many women who have created incredible things.
And not talked about for some reason.
If you enjoyed our discussion, then make sure you come along to our next Blue Stockings group to find out more. And now, for our final interview, Cara Gooding is conducting research into how people perceive research about sexism in STEM. There is some evidence to suggest that there is no sexism, and some to suggest there clearly is. Ms. Gooding's project explores the different responses that people have had to this research.
Hello, please can you introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about the research that you've been doing?
Hello, my name is Cara Gooding. I am a 4th year student at University of St Andrews, studying psychology and philosophy. I have recently engaged in a research project that wants to understand how people perceive evidence about sexism in STEM. It's based off a study that looked at another study that showed that there was sexism against women in STEM. And my project is looking at a study that showed not even that there isn't sexism against women in STEM, but that there is actually a bias in favour of women in STEM. And I want to see how these comments differ from each other.
Interesting. And what has your research shown so far?
Study that I'm basing my project off of, there seemed to be a lot of people who, while they agreed there was sexism against women in STEM, they justified it by saying either that women, mostly saying that women had different psychological, biological properties and therefore just didn't have the same ability to succeed in STEM as men do. I've found that when the tables are turned, there isn't the same kind of response. People are far more willing to say that the bias against men, which is how it's been perceived, is completely unjustified, and far more people are more likely to say that there is a broader problem with sexism against specifically white men within STEM or even the wider workplace. They've also found that people are more likely to justify the underrepresentation of women, which is actually similar to the first study in which it was justifying the gender bias against women, so we can see that people sort of perceive these two things as being the same thing, but still would like to sort of push them aside. I also found that there really is a significant number of the comments that are specifically targeting feminism. As a feminist myself, I just found these comments quite interesting because they were absent from, or at least not significant, in the Moss-Rakusin study, which is the study I'm basing mine off of. But the fact that there was so much animosity towards this idea, which wasn't even proposed by the study or the articles themselves, shows that there is this underlying attitude related to sexism in STEM where they assume that any sort of wanting to combat sexism in STEM or seeing a lack of sexism as a good thing is not only part of this dogmatic ideology, but this actual hateful attack on men. Again, which is not something that was covered in the original study or the original articles themselves. And finally, even though there were a huge number of people that either agreed that there wasn't sexism in STEM or that there was sexism against men, believed that they commented about the study, they commented on the study and the quality of the study. And most of the comments about the study itself were very critical, critiquing the method, critiquing the sort of conclusions that were drawn and all that kind of thing. Which is interesting because it shows that while you do have a huge number of people that perceive this sort of the common thought that there is sexism against women in STEM as being an attack on men, there are also a significant number of people engaging in this conversation that don't agree with the study, that think that there isn't as much to draw from these results as the people who think there is an attack on men would like to conclude.
So, do you think that sexism still manifests itself in STEM today?
There's a lot of research in whether or not there is sexism in STEM. There is quite a lot of research that supports this claim in a variety of ways. First one that has gotten the most publicity recently is the Moss-Rakusin study of 2012, in which they sent out identical CVs, and the only change they made was half the CVs had the name Jennifer and half the CVs had the name John. And they found that they sent them out to hiring faculty and found that they were less likely to hire women, less likely to mentor women, and viewed the women generally as less competent. More recently, there's been a study by Rubin, Sapienza, and Zingales in 2014. Took a bunch of hiring managers in a variety of STEM fields, and several participants, half were male, half were female, and made them perform a maths task. It was the kind of task that generally men and women tend to do equally well at. And asked the hiring manager, based on this maths task, whether or not they would hire whichever participant, man or a woman. And they found that the hiring managers tended not to hire the woman, or less likely to hire the woman than the man, due to the belief that women performed worse in maths tasks than the men did, which was not true. There is some conflicting evidence as to whether or not there's sexism in STEM. One study by William and Stacey that recently has gotten a lot of publicity showed that in tenure-track faculty positions, they found that there was a 2-to-1 hiring bias in favour of women. They sent out personal narratives as opposed to CVs, detailing whether how good these participants were, and all these participants were excellent candidates. And they found that for almost all areas of STEM, except for economics, the faculty of both genders were twice as likely to hire women than men. In the only difference is that in economics, male faculty were equally as likely to hire men as women. This piece of evidence, while definitely very interesting and needs to be considered critically, has raised a lot of controversy, especially from within psychology and people who are studying this area. I do think it's important to maintain an open mind when considering evidence about whether or not there's sexism in STEM, because this is an area that is dynamic. We are trying to change it, and hopefully eventually we will be at a stage where we can say that there isn't any difference in hiring tendencies between genders. However, I would say overall that I would be more open to accepting the idea that there is still sexism in STEM, partially because, and mostly because, there is so much evidence that says this, and also because it manifests itself in so many different areas of STEM. Hiring is certainly one area that I think it still does happen, although we still take all evidence into account, but that there's sexism in a variety of areas besides hiring tendencies. One main area that is presumed a lot in these studies is gender stereotypes. The stereotype that women are not as analytic as men, less capable of mathematics, and more likely to use emotions or bring in personal bias where it's not warranted. There's also gender role expectations, where there is one study that found that graduate scholars would hire abstracts by female scholars when they were more associated with what would possibly be called their appropriate field, parenting and body image being an example, and men were more highly rated when they were writing in their appropriate field, with air quotes, for example, politics. There's also the problem where there's other areas where women just don't have as many opportunities. Women are also less likely to be asked onto panels, especially if they are led by a man. In conclusion, I would say there is some controversy within the field as to whether or not there is sexism in STEM, although I feel like most of the researchers within this field would agree that there is still sexism in STEM.
There is evidence to suggest that there is sexism in STEM. Potential solutions, as cited in this podcast, are to review gendered expectations and education, encourage confidence in women, and to stand together. Talking about this and making it a top priority. And this podcast with more Vox Pops with people's perspectives on sexism in STEM.
Why is it important that it becomes gender equal in STEM, within the STEM field? For me, I feel that there is a kind of hierarchy of intellectual, what we see as intelligence, and math and this logical thinking is like on the top of this hierarchy. And that since that's so male dominated, it's really important for women to go in there, and because otherwise we have different fields which are seen as they're less important because it's about emotions and it's about talking and the social aspect, and that's not seen as hard science.
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons why we need women in STEM is just because, like, we need women creating things for women. Because I think that frequently, like, okay, obviously, like, women are capable of doing, like, any sort of jobs and any sort of thing that they want to do, but realistically, certain gendered expectations are placed on women to do certain things, like take care of the kids and, like, wash the clothes and make dinner and, like, whatever. So it ends up that a lot of women do end up doing those things. And, like, you don't, because those are considered, like, womanly things to do, you don't have a lot of, like, men creating technologies to help, because they just don't think about it. And so I think that, like you mentioned, like, the women creating an app to make women feel safer as they walk home is not the sort of thing that a man is going to think to create. And so I think that, like, having women in STEM who are creating things to make other women's lives easier is really important.
That's something that I never think that there are, like, that women and engineers have actually invented things, but there are so many women who have created incredible things.
And not talked about for some reason. Even, you know, like how when it's a birthday of somebody important, Google put it up on their headline. Like, I don't see that many women's name on that logo too and all that. I mean, like, I feel like we should be taught more that women did do something. We did contribute a lot to the society, to the inventions. We just kind of always get skipped over somehow. And a lot of girls growing up thinking that, oh, it's impossible for me to become an engineer or a scientist, because I've never heard of any famous female scientist somehow, which probably means nobody succeeds, which is not true in reality.
Thank you for listening. Our next episode will be on the resignation of Bob Lambert, a man who lectured at St Andrews University and worked with the undercover secret police. This will be our last episode in the Work and Leisure series, so stay tuned for more from Spectrum.